So what I want to talk about in this video are research and development financial concepts and really thinking about, targets for research and development in terms of strategy. So if you don't know me, I'm Professor Dave Maslach. I'm Associate Professor of Innovation Strategy and Entrepreneurship. And I created this whole reciprocity project to give back as much as I possibly can. There's so many people that help me out that I want to pay the favor forward to help you out. So this video is going to be geared towards managers. I'm kind of doing a bit of a series on this if you want to watch the last few videos on this. And it's really thinking about research and development. So what I'm talking about is research and development very broadly, so not just specifically, basic research and stuff like that, but also, like development where you're actually doing things to, that's more applied in the sense that you can get more direct return for the thing that you're actually working on, right? So, to some degree, this applies to all research and development. And if you do this in your company, right? So if you're a manager or, you are, a current employee in research and development, you're probably going to do a little bit, it's going to be very helpful for you. So thinking about these sort of tips in terms of research and development is going to be very helpful for you to develop and become a better manager and to actually do better in the long run. And so what I'm going to talk about in terms of these ideas is not only maximizing your current performance in terms of what you do at this moment in your company, in your corporation, but also thinking about long-term survival. And that's really what we're thinking about with research and development, is sort of doing this balance of maximizing what you currently do at this moment and trying to get as much profit as much as you possibly can, but also thinking about, in the long run, can I do something that is going to help me survive, right? So you have to think about sort of this dual goal system. What we often call is exploration exploitation, that's been sort of popularized in the management literature. So in terms of tips of dealing with research and development, the first thing is you want to sort of think about what your target amount of expenditure of R&D you have in your industry, right? So you want to look at what other players are doing in your industry. It's always different. There's a huge amount of variability, or what is called heterogeneity, across industries and industry sectors. So you want to look at, can you compare in terms of how much you're currently spending with the sales that you currently bring in? How do you actually compare and what you actually do? So if your industry is, that you spend 5% of your total sales that you bring in, your revenue that you bring in on research and development, you should at least set that for a target, right? And depending on what your strategy is as a firm, in terms of, maybe you want to do a little bit more and be more aggressive in research and development, then you set it for maybe it's 7 or 8% or something like that. So you're always looking for some sort of ratio or target in terms of what you're trying to do. And then you can also think about how you fare in terms of, the size that you actually have as a firm, right? So some firms that are larger can spend a little bit more, and so you might want to target that. And some firms they're smaller are going to look like they spend a lot more in research and development because they're smaller and maybe they're at a startup stage or something like that. So you have to sort of make sense of what makes sense for you in terms of how much you're spending in your research and development. So you have to balance that. That's an important thing to think about. And you always want to be thinking about kind of relative terms of how much you're actually spending. So it's not necessarily you're just going full bore in research and development all the time, but you want to think about, well, maybe I should ease back and only spend 5% this year, or maybe I should increase a little bit more and spend 10%. And thinking about it in terms of relative terms really helps out in terms of making sense of what you should be doing, right? So this is what how you might want to target what you're trying to do, right? So it's up to you to sort of figure out what are the firms that you want to compare against in your industry and see what the target is and try to set that as a nice target for you to go forward with. A second thing that I think is really important is really think about a portfolio of projects, right? So not just thinking about spending all your money on one project. What you want to do is think about all sorts of different projects that you could be working on. And some of them could be really short term, and some of them could be really long term in the sense that the returns that they're actually going to bring. So sometimes you want to do things that have a short term reward because you want to bring in money, but also sometimes you want to do things that give you survival in the long run that could net you something in the long run. And so sometimes you have to also think about, whether, and probably short term is a little bit more like this, where you think about, does it fit with what you're doing at this moment? And if they don't fit, maybe you can actually, maybe you don't do that particular project. But in the long run, sometimes you want to look at long run projects that actually just don't fit with what you're doing, because you're trying to ensure when the market changes that you're actually doing something that that is going to be profitable, right? That you actually have developed this competency in this particular thing, right? So sometimes, this is the third point I wanted to point out, is sometimes you want to be actually working on projects. So we all have projects that we think are going to be successful and are going to do really well, and we sort of put all our eggs in the things that we think are going to be successful. But sometimes you want to work on things that you believe are not necessarily going to do that well. So you have to really nurture those things that are going to be failures. And the reason is because the market changes. Sometimes you just don't know what is going to do well in the long run, and so you have to have some things that you intuitively believe are going to fail, but you actually invest in them anyways. And so that's a real tricky thing for a lot of us behaviorally, both as organizations and both as managers and individuals, to deal with these things, because you do feel like a failure. So you have to build in things and cultural aspects and reward systems to prevent you from getting caught up in the sort of stigma of failure, and really push past that. And I know that's hard to do, because it goes against evolution. It really does. And so we have to think about, how do we actually reinforce things and make it culturally okay to do things that you believe are going to be complete disasters. And now you have to sort of bound it in terms of how much you're spending on those complete disasters. But at the same time, you also want to reward those people that are working on things that are creative and different and stuff like that. So it's really tricky to sort of find that right balance, but you can do it. Companies do this in terms of ones that do it well. One company that does this well is Google, or Alphabet at this moment. If you look at Google X, for example, where they had sort of experimental labs where they just do kind of goofy things, they're always working on things that don't work out in any sort of way, and then they divest them in some sort of way. So the other thing that you should be doing is looking for ways to blend resources and allocate resources. So not just create an R&D lab that does this sort of thing, but you might want to bring in people, different sort of individuals to come in at different times within the project. Maybe switch the project around sometimes with different, physical spaces and things like that. And the reason is what you're trying to do is to fuse some of those ideas that could do really well in your organization, right? So you want to make sure that you're constantly bringing in these ideas with other people and making it part of your organization. As you know, it's really hard to do that, to sort of make this culturally relevant, but you have to sort of work on that to get it to fly, right? You as manager actually have to cultivate this particular thing. Now, the last thing is, with research and development, it's really important for you to think about sort of timelines in terms of how much you're going to net. And I think most people sort of misallocate their, this in terms of, they think of research and development should be working on things that are going to net you immediate returns. And, immediate is in the next 5 years. If you think that the project that you're working on is going to net you something in the next 5 years, then that is really close to immediate, right? So you are thinking that there is direct benefit of working on this thing, but you have to also allocate some resources, whatever that percentage is of that research and development budget, right? So maybe you spend 5% of your sales on research and development. Well, then you spend 10% or 25% of that amount that you're spending on research and development, and then you target things that have really long run potential that you think are going to do well. So this is different than the ones that you think are going to do poorly, right? As I pointed out, what you're looking at is ones that you think are going to do well. And we don't know if they're going to do well, but you believe that they're going to do well as well, right? So you have to sort of exercise that restraint to allocate some resources to these very long run projects that, they're probably 10 years out in terms of when they actually start benefiting you. And behaviorally, it is really hard to do this stuff. So think that a good analogy is weight loss or going to school or something like that, where it just takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to get there. But the benefits of that are very large in the long run. And so behaviorally, we just don't do that. In organizations, it's hard to do that. And as individuals, it's hard to sort of think about the long term. So we have to balance that, make sure that we're constantly doing that as we sort of grow as companies and thinking about the long run thing. Because eventually you do catch up to that, right? So eventually you do get to that 10-year mark, and you'll be happy you worked on that thing. And then you have to think about something else. It's constantly increasing in terms of, it's called a rolling window. You're constantly thinking about the next 10 years, the next 10 years, the next 10 years, every single year of what you can be working on and really investing in those. And it's hard to do. Behaviorally, it is very tricky, especially when times get tough, to sort of pull back on those sort of pie in the sky ideas, but they're very important for your business in the long run. So really keep that in mind as you work on these things. So with that, hopefully you learned a lot. Give me one of these old thumbs up. I do appreciate it. Take care and have a wonderful day. Good luck on this. I know that there's lots to be learned here. So good luck and have fun. Take care. Bye.